So the next feature that we will do is that we are actually going to build a modified edit, which means that we aren't going to edit all the fields, just a single field. But if we do want to do all of the fields, which in most cases we are, we will approach that later on in React Day 2. We're also going to build out a filter technique where we will filter out, depending on what they are, if they're complete or not, we will filter them out depending on those cases. So let's go ahead and do that. First, we need to update our list component just to be having another component right under it. So within our case here, when we plan out our structures, we have the list and the to-do item here. So with the list and to-do item, the list is the parent and to-do is the children. We'll have multiple to-do items here. And the reason why we want to do this is just to have a separation of concerns. And also, if we do it at this level, we could potentially update all of them unintentionally. So a better thing to do is just break them out into its own component and to have access to that component and all of its features in there. Kind of very similar to how we have a show. And with that show, we can have all the details of the to-do and everything that we want to do with it inside of that component. So first, I am going to create a new component called to-do. So with the to-do, I am going to have this be a presentational component. The reason being is that even though I am doing a edit, I actually don't need the logic inside of this component. But within this component, I am going to show all the details of the to-do. And the details that it has is ID, name, and complete. And any other props that we need to pass in will be inside of these parentheses right here. And then before I forget, I am going to export to-do by default. Meaning if I export this file, by default, it will also export the to-do. If I don't do it by export, I would have to create a curly brace here for when I do import it. And I'm able to import multiple components that way if I need to. So here, I'm actually going to copy all of this here, but I'm going to change it slightly. I notice that this is called to-do's name instead of just name itself, so we'll change that accordingly, just because that is the name of the to-do altogether. And here we don't need to pass in a key, we only need to pass in the key when we do loop. So we don't need to do that at this level. And then let's see what else we need to grab over. I do want to create some sort of a styling for us to use. And looks like I made a mistake of using brackets instead of parentheses. So presentational components always have a parentheses unless we do a return statement in there, which we are in this case. So I'm going to have some styles, and this is a different way of styling. Earlier you saw that inside of your styles, you are able to do inline styling, which is those set of curly braces and the styles attributes. What we're doing here is that we are having styles to be a module. And with this module, I am going to have it be set as a key value pair. So the key would be the complete, and then the value would be an object of all the styles. So this is another way how you would style. And there's actually a more efficient way of doing things, but for demonstration's sake, I am going to do it this way. So with the complete styles, I'm going to have it grayed out as well as having a line through it. And then we're having a comma here as a trailing comma, just in case if we do need to use any other styles, we can add them on here. The other thing I'm going to do is that if I do implement this, I need to run some sort of logic so I know that I'm not applying these styles through all of them, because this is only for what they look like when they're complete. If that is the case, then with the style, it really depends on the complete. And complete is a Boolean, so it's true or false. So if it's true, then I will grab all the styles that are from the one that I just created. So I called it styles, and typically you would want to call this styles, and then it will be .complete because we're grabbing that whole object to be the styles. Else, I am going to give it null. So there won't be any styles if it's not complete. So then let's see what this looks like. But first we need to change up our list a bit so it reflects our change here. So we are just displaying all of the items that to-do has, and with each and every single one of them, depending on if they're complete or not, they would have the styles or not, and they are also displaying the name. So here, we are actually going to refactor this a bit to implement our component of to-do. So I'm going to import to-do from ./to-do. The reason why it's ./to-do because it's just right next over in the file structure. So it's just ./to-do here. So then I'm going to change this a bit. So I'm going to change this into to-do, like so, which means that I'm rendering out that component. And with the component tag, I am doing a self-closing tag. And I also need to pass in everything the to-do has. So technically, I could do like ID equals t.id and to-do name equals t.to-do name and complete equals all of that. But a better way to do that, because if there is anything else than those three, then we need to add in addition to this. So to make our code a lot more dry, I'm going to spread out t. So that gives you all of the t and all the values. So all of the things that t has, like complete, ID, the to-do name, that will all be spread out in here and passed down through prompts. So instead of typing in those key value pairs, which works, but then there are any more in addition to that, you would have to add them on here as well. With that being passed in, we can see it in our dev tools. So we go from lists, and yeah, let's go ahead and start our server because we did stop our server. And I'll just do yarn start to start it again. And let's also make sure I'm CD into the right one. So let me CD into to-do list and do a yarn stop. So let's take a look at what we're passing through with lists. So we know that for sure for lists, we're passing in the prop of key, and then we're also passing in the spread of all of the thing T has. So we take a look at lists here. You can see that for each of the to-dos, we're passing the complete ID and the to-do's name here for each and single one of those. And we did that with this. That's the equivalence of us typing it out like so. Let me actually show you what that looks like if we do type it out. This is in your lecture notes. If we do type it out, it'll be these values right here. And again, if it has in additional fields like email or password or age, you would need to pass them on into here as well. But this is kind of the shorthand of doing that. So now that we have those values pulled in for to-dos and complete, we are now able to use all of those. So we do have complete now, and as you can tell for the ones that have the complete of true, it has a line through it because of the styles. And with them being complete false, then by default, it would not be with those styles grayed out and that line through. So let's actually change a little bit of that. So every time we click it, we kind of do a little bit of a small update where we update the complete to true to false or false to true. And that will also toggle the styles accordingly. So with this, since the information that is stored inside of here we're actually using that inside of this component. But when we run the logic of complete, we're actually not running it here. We're calling the function here, but this is not where we would define the function, because this is not where the ID to do name and complete resides. So we actually need to go up the tree of where we have these items defined as. So up the tree means that we're already in to do, and to do is being passed down information from lists. And list is being passed down information from app. So if we check there, that is actually the location of where we're writing this logic. So from to do to list, this is where the to do information is passing through. And then app, which is the higher order component, this is where the to do is actually having these values. So these are the values that we need to have access to and to be able to change as well. So that's what we'll be doing here. So let's go ahead and do a update function like so. So with the update function, we'll do update to do. And we need to figure out an ID for each of them. Because an update, you do need to pass an ID, or else you would end up updating all of them, which shouldn't be the case for this particular thing. So first, I'm going to grab all of the to-dos from state. And I am going to set the state. But I'm going to set the state a little bit differently because I need to run some logic depending on what I'm doing. So what I'm setting is the to-dos array. And with the to-dos array, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to map through the to-dos that are in the array. I'm going to call each one of those as a to-do, singular. And we need to run some logic, a conditional. So if to-do the ID equals in both value and type of the ID of the one that we're updating, then that means that we are updating that one, and I'm going to return everything that that to-do has, as well as complete to be the opposite of what it is. So if it's true, then it'll change it to false. If it's false, it will change it to true. And then outside of this if statement, if it doesn't have the ID of the one that we look for, I'm just going to return that and continue iteration. Like so. So what we're doing here is that the dot map actually returns to you a whole entire array. And we are going to return an array here, but what we're doing is that inside of the array, when we are iterating through it, we're looking for the one that we're updating, and then we are updating that value. Again, this is not what you do in every single case. You would update the incoming information, not just a single value like we have here. So in our case, we're just updating complete. But in actuality, you would update this to be the new updated value. And if it's not the one that we're looking for, just continue the iteration. So that is how we're approaching our update here, is that we're using our update to change the complete value from true to false and false to true. So with this update, we need to use this in our to-do component here. And the way to do that, and the way to have access to that, is to pass it down all the way down the tree to props. So it will be from app to list and then from list to to-dos, because that's how we set up our structure here. So we need to pass in this update function from app to list and then from list to to-do. So let's do that. And when you're passing things through props, you can call it whatever you want, but I'm just going to call it update to do just so it will be less confusing. And that would be the function of this update to do, like so. So I pass it down to lists. Now we need to go one more level and pass it down to to-dos. So I just pass down the prop of to-do being the function that we just created. And then next thing is inside of lists, we need to bring it down from props, because now if we check lists here, we now have the update function of to-do. So we need to bring that over to the to-do props as well. So let's go one more level. And since this is a presentational component, we're actually passing down props through here. So it doesn't actually work if you do this.props.update to do because of the different type of component this is. So with this, since I am bringing it in, that's the equivalence of this.props, I need to also bring it in here as well. So update to do will equal update to do, just like that. So I'm passing down the prop of update to do of the function that is being passed down to this component. So now if we take a look, we went from list that has update to do, and now each of our to-dos have the update to do function for us to use. That's actually what we need right now. So let's actually use that to our advantage. So now let's go ahead and bring it down here for us to use. And let's actually use it here. So you can do this multiple ways. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add an event listener of on click here. And when we click, I am going to do this here. And with this, I'm going to update my click or update to do with passing in the ID here. And if you might be wondering, why do we need that information when I can just call update to do? Well, let me actually show you. If you see this, that means that you're actually calling that function multiple times. So it actually errored out when we did hit this limit, because when we are explicitly calling a function and just with the parentheses, that will always call that function, right? And in this particular case, we don't want that because we don't want this function to be called every single time that we land on the page. We want this to be called when we click on it. So to prevent this from happening and to prevent the error from happening, we will run this as an anonymous function. So we ran it as an anonymous function, meaning that by default, we are having no functions until we actually click it, then we're doing the update ID. So make sure that when you're updating and deleting, you need to pass in the function, or else it will always run that function when you call it like so. So now if we click on it, we can actually toggle the complete Boolean here because of the logic. And let's walk through of what it's actually doing. So with this, the complete is false. So when I click it, what it will do is it will trigger this event handler of onClick. And what this event handler does an update to do, which is being passed down from parent to child, from list to do, and it's also being passed down from app to list. So app to list right here. And this is where the logic is being defined. So when we are clicking on it, we do pass it in the ID of the one we're clicking in. In our case, since I'm updating the second one, it has an ID of 2 right here. So that is the ID of 2. So with this, the parameter that we're passing in for the ID, that is 2. So we are destructuring the to-dos from state. So we're grabbing all the to-dos from state, which is the array of objects. And we are setting that to a new array. So this is a new array that we created when we mapped through it. So we iterate through each of the items, referencing each one of those objects as to do. So each of these lines are to do. And with that, if it's the to do ID equals to the ID that we're matching, so it goes through it one by one, and it checks this value here of ID. One by one, if it does that conditional, if it is the ID of 2, which is the one we're looking for, then that is where we'll do the update. If it's not, then we're actually going to return the to-do there. So since this is the first iteration, ID is 1, so that 1 does not equal 2. So that just returns this object here, and then we move on to the next one. So this one here, when it's the second iteration, we do have the ID of 2, and this is where it will run the logic of the if statement here. So if we are going to run with the ID of the one we're looking for, we're returning everything that the to-do has, such as the ID as well as the to name. We're just leaving that be, but we're actually changing complete to be the opposite of what it is. So we're changing complete to be true if it's false and false if it's true. And then return that and then continue iteration until the loop is done. Afterwards, that will give you a whole array of all of the values that were not changed, as well as a new value that we did update. And that's what's going on when we do this modified update like so. Again, this isn't a realistic update because this only updates one value. Realistically, you would update all of the values. And I'll show you how that is on another day. But this is just to help to get you to the idea of an update feature, which is a little bit more difficult than the add feature. Because with the add feature, we're just adding in addition to all of the to-dos. But with the update, we need to find the one that we're looking for and then update it like so, and then update the array afterwards. Okay. So that is the update functionality. Let's do one more functionality, and that would be the filter kind of functionality here. So essentially what I want is that with all of the to-dos, it would be nice to have a filter to filter out the ones that are complete or not complete, or just to see all of my to-dos. So that is the feature that we will be working on. And with this kind of concept, you can actually apply this to a lot of your other projects. So later on in your primary portfolios, your final project, or your hackathon, if you need some sort of a filter or some sort of a search engine, then this is the approach that you will have to be able to do this type of logic. So let's go ahead and do that. So I am going to put like a filter bar right here. And depending on each of those options, like all complete or not complete, that will toggle in addition to what we are doing here. So that's the kind of filter we're doing. So since that is another thing that we want to add, I am going to add in something else that I will be storing in state. And I want to do this here because this is where we're actually going to filter out the values. So I need to put a comma here. And another thing that we would have is a filter functionality. And by default, let's just have it be all. So we're showing all of the items of our to-do. Yeah. I am going to do it like this just so there's a little bit of separation there. So I'm also going to write a function, call it setFilter, where we are going to be able to change the filter depending on if we call this function or not. So that is the incoming filter. And with that, I am going to do a this.setState. And the filter would be whatever the filter we're passing in. And instead of saying it like this way, so filter, the key is equal to the filter of the one being passed in. Since those are both the same name, React is smart enough to know what you mean by that if they do have the same name. So we can just say filter here, and it knows that it's the filter key with the given value of whatever filter represents. So this is the start of our filters, just to have something by default and also a way to change our filter. I am also going to go ahead and kind of plan out my components a bit. So since this is a whole nother component, I'm actually going to break this out in another place. So technically what I'm doing here is that here I am going to build out a filter right here. I'm just going to call it footer, just so I don't confuse myself of like the component name and the functionality, and you'll kind of see why in a bit. So I'm going to create a footer component, and this is going to be ./components. And this one doesn't really have to do with to-dos, but you could put it in that folder if you intend to. So that's where we are actually going to put it. And again, this will give you an error because it can't find the module because we haven't created it yet. We're just planning ahead at this point. So when we are planning ahead, we have this import here of footer. So let's actually use that a little bit later on here when we do render our stuff. So rendering again means that we're displaying it onto the page. And I also need to pass in the filter here just because that's also something else that we are grabbing from state. So with the footer, I'll have it here. And I need to pass in a few things. The first thing I need to pass in is the filter of what I'm trying to look for, of what it currently is, right? So the filter is whatever we're storing from state, right? Whatever this value is. The other thing I need to pass in is I need a way to change the filter, which is this function here of set filter. So I need to pass that down through props for us to use inside of the component there. So this will be this dot set filter. What this means is that this refers to this component set filter function. So this component set filter function. Okay. So that's what we will do so far. Now for this to work, we need to create a new file as well as a component to be footer. Again, component names are always capital letter in your file structure. And we also need to import React from React, just so we have access to all the React features. So with this kind of component, we need to be able to have it to display different filters and to change the styles depending on them. And for that particular case, this will be a presentational component. Because again, when we are filtering them out, we're not filtering them here in this component because we don't have access to any of the to-dos that we are filtering. We're actually going to filter here in the app component because this is where the information is actually located at. So with the footer, again, we pass in the filter that it's currently on, as well as a function of set filter to change the filter if we need to. And then before I forget, I'll do export default footer just so we're able to use it. And make sure you have your parentheses here, not a curly brace. And if you get this error, a parsing error, that means that inside of your code, you're not returning anything. You're not displaying anything. So you do need to display something like a div tag or something. That way it'll get rid of that error. So here, I am going to go ahead and have my filter bar. So how it is that I'm going to have an array of values of all and I'll say like active to-dos and complete. So all will show all the to-dos, active will show the complete that is false, and complete is the one with the complete of true. So with that, I am going to map, and when I'm mapping, I'm going to call each one of those as a filter. I'm actually going to do a filter link, which is another component that I would create, but I'm not actually going to create this component inside of this file. So the filter link will need the filter itself of the current filter, as well as everything that this item is. So it'll give you the string of all active or complete. That's what F is, depending on which one we're iterating through. And then we also need a way to change it, which is our set filter. And let's see, it looks like I am missing some syntax here. So there is a curly brace, and that ends with this curly brace. box bracket, box bracket. Yeah, that actually looks good. I think it's complaining because it's not defined here. So let's go ahead and define that. Again, this is another component. And you could do another component inside of this file, but I don't recommend it. I would actually push it to its own file. But since these really rely on each other, then I would put it in this file here. But typically you would want your components to be in different files so you're able to use it. So with this one, this would be the current filter, as well as the name of the filter and the set filter function. Because that's what we're being passed through within the parameters of filter link. And here, I'm going to write this a little bit differently than a presentational component. This is more of a function than a component. Because with this function, well, the reason how you can tell is that if we're passing through props, then we are doing a component, a presentational component. But if we have it like so, with just the parentheses, and we're not passing through props or anything, that's actually a function. So with this, I'm going to run some logic in here. So depending on if current is equal to the name, so that means that if the filter is already active, then I will just return probably like a span or something of the name. Else, I am going to return a span of the name that is changed to, and I'm also going to change it within the state as well. So within this span, I'm going to do a on click. So if we do click on it, and again, we need to have this running when we click on it, not when we call the function of the filter of the name. So that is where we will be changing the set filter like so. So depending on what we click, it will change it accordingly. Okay. So as you can see here, we click on all active or complete. That would trigger our logic of changing the filter like so. In the lecture, it also gives you some styles, just so it's not close together. I'm just going to skip that, just so we have something for us to do that isn't just styling. So it looks like set filter is not a function, and it is correct because I called this set filter. Make sure your spelling is right. It's filter. And that is being passed down from app. So whatever we called a here over here, set filter, which kind of looks weird now, that would be passed down from parent to child all the way here. And this is a function. So this isn't a component. Okay, so now let's try that again. And right now it doesn't do anything, but if you actually click on the app inside of your DevTools, if you take a look at the filter state here, everything that we click on, it will change it accordingly, which is what we want. So that will change accordingly depending on what we clicked. But we don't want it to just change the state. We also want it to also change the to-do items here. So that is the last item of the filter feature that we need to do. Is to also have that applied with this. So inside of your app here, we will actually do another function, and I'll do this a little bit lower right here. And here I'm going to call it visible item or visible to-dos. So these are what are showing at a given time. So depending on the filter, it will show different to-do items. And with this, I need to grab a few things from the state. I need to grab all the to-dos from the state as well as the filter from the state. And I can do that with object destruction. So I'm grabbing the to-dos as well as filter from the state. And then I need to run some sort of a conditional. And there's multiple ways you can do that. Instead of if else, I'm going to do a switch because you probably haven't seen a switch in JavaScript. It's very different than Ruby. So Ruby is like a case when, but in JavaScript it's a switch case. So it works very similarly, but with different syntax. So for each of the cases, for the filter, if it's active, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the to-dos, and then dot filter is actually a JavaScript function that filters out the array that you pass it through with the given parameter that you have in parentheses. So what we have here is that we are returning an array, which is what filter will give you afterwards, of all of the to-dos with a not complete functionality. So all of them will return if it's false. And we're saying to not to do complete here because we can't just say t.complete here. We have to write it in a different way. So this is actually how you would do it to get all of the complete to-dos that has the complete Boolean as false. So then we'll write another case here of complete. If it is complete, then that would actually be almost the same exact logic of returning all of the filtered to-dos. But in this case, we want to return all the ones that are complete. So it'll be t.complete. And then finally, we'll have our default case. This is your else inside of your conditional here. So by default, if we don't specify anything, that would be our all. We're actually going to return all of the to-dos, like so. Okay. So let's walk through this logic again, because it is a little bit confusing. So depending on the filter, right, the filter is all active or complete. If we click on one of those, we are also setting the state to these values here, depending on which one we click, right? So if we click on active, the state will be active. If we click on complete, the state will have complete in it. So depending on those values that are stored in the filter inside of our state, we are running some logic. If it's active, then we are returning all the to-dos with complete or false. If it's complete, then we are returning the to-dos with complete of true. And there's multiple ways you can do this. I'm just doing it with the dot filter loop that will filter out the to-do with the given information. So filter is a JavaScript function that we learned when we did our loops. Else, if it's all, see how we don't have a case for all, that's just the default case. We're actually returning all of the to-dos. So that's the logic of how we would filter out our to-dos here. But there's actually one last step that we need, because this doesn't fully work, right? Because as you can see here, inside of list, it always returns the array that we pass in. And the array we pass in is whatever we have inside of here. So in actuality, we need to change our list to not do the to-dos from our state, because that's what we have here. We want to have our list to display it depending on the to-dos that we filter out. So if that's the case, then instead of to-dos here, I'm actually going to remove it. And that means that we're no longer using this part here from state. It will be this dot visible items. which is the function that we have here, right? And that function will decide of what we're actually showing for each of our to-dos. So instead of the original array, we're actually going to do this function here, which is the array depending on each filter. So let's test this out. So right now it's all by default here. So then let's change it to active, complete, and toggle back and forth. And that's how you would do a filter functionality. So let's break that down of what we're actually doing. So first, we need to store in the filter of the default filter. By default, we should just show all of the to-dos. We also need a function to change this filter to be a different type of value. And that's this function here. We're just setting the state of filter to be whatever is being passed in. Something else that we have is we have another component called footer. And that footer will pass in that information of that function that changes the filter and the current filter value. So let's take a look at that component here. So with this component, I am going to have 3 items here, all active and complete. And these are the individual buttons that we click on to change the filter. What I'm doing for each of these values is that I'm calling a function of filter link. And depending on if it's already the link or not, I'm going to change that accordingly. So if we do click on all and the filter isn't all, then it'll switch it to all. If it is, then it will just stay the way it is. Not only do we have this here, we also have some logic here. With the visible to do, what we're doing here is that we're filtering out depending on which one we clicked on for all active or complete. So this is active, complete, and this is all because that's the default case. And most of the time, the default case will return to you the original array. So that's why we don't have it as another case, just because the default should already handle that. So depending on which one we clicked, it will filter out the to-dos accordingly with the logic that we have here. And that's essentially how you would do a filter here. And later on, when you implement this type of technology in your application, you may modify it or have it be implemented in a search bar. So you may not even have this button here. It might be like an input here where you type in search, and that will search all the values that start with A or all the values that start with C. It'll be a very similar technique of what we did here, but in actuality, this part will be different, right? Because you have to run a little bit more logic of like, try to find all the to-dos with the values that start with like T or whatever the user inputs. So that is the filter value and the feature that we worked on. And again, we can modify it to use as search or as another filter, things like that. So that's what all I have for this continued lecture. So we did an update, a modify update, where we do update the values if we click on it. And again, for this example, this isn't ideal. We're just updating one value, not the whole entire thing. A better update would, you will actually be able to update like the name if you need to, as well as complete. So this is just a modified version of it. And also, if we refresh the page, all that will go back to the default. So we actually do need a database to save those changes. We also created a filter for us to filter out different to-dos for us to use. So before I let you all go, let's go ahead and stop our server and push this up to GitHub. So we'll do git add, git commit, and I should have did 2 commits, one for the update feature and one for the filter, but I'll put that all in a single commit. So this would be update and filter. And then git push origin master. If you have any questions of what I did in this lecture, try to review everything and try to make sense of everything we did inside of this video. and also reference the lecture notes as well. But if you're still confused on the concepts, feel free to reach out to me or any of the TAs, and I'm more than welcome to help you out with that. So I'll see you all in the next class where we are actually doing a very similar thing of what we did with this app, but inside of another application. So see you later.